There is deep grief across the country over the murder of beloved actor and director Rob Reiner and his wife. But layered onto that grief is something darker: widespread anger and revulsion over President Trump's response. His comments were not merely inappropriate. They were ghoulish, sneering, and disturbingly cold, almost celebratory. The reaction has been visceral. At the same time, something significant happened in Los Angeles. President Trump's deployment of National Guard troops collapsed. A federal judge ruled that the deployment was illegal, and federalized Guard units were ordered to leave. The troops are gone, the ruling stands. But to understand the moment we're living in, we need to start somewhere colder. Much colder. In Minnesota, about 15 miles southwest of Minneapolis, an extraordinary scene unfolded over the weekend. It was unplanned and spontaneous. It happened outdoors in brutal sub-zero temperatures, and it revealed something raw and urgent about this moment in American life. According to witnesses, ICE agents arrived early Saturday morning in a residential neighborhood in Chanhassen to detain 2 construction workers at a home under construction. To avoid detention, the workers climbed into the rafters. As word spread online, neighbors began to arrive, then more neighbors, then activists. The goal was simple: do not let these men be taken. People stood outside as temperatures plunged below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. They shouted, pleaded, and demanded that ICE leave. EMTs were called when one worker began suffering from exposure. Another remained trapped in the rafters for hours, as people below passed up blankets, food, and hot drinks, trying to keep him alive. Eventually, ICE was through. When they did, people embraced. They chanted. They celebrated not a victory, but a rescue. Arms locked, cars coordinated, and the worker was shielded as he climbed down and was safely escorted away. The message was unmistakable. Immigrants are valued here, and this community will protect them. Local reporters captured footage of neighbors climbing into the rafters themselves so the man would not be alone. Reports were chaotic, but the worker was later hospitalized for exposure and is expected to recover. The very next day, resistance continued in Minneapolis. Postal workers and community members gathered outside post offices after reports that ICE had been using postal parking lots to stage operations. Workers said they had not consented and were not cooperating. "We want a society free of secret police," one worker said. That phrase echoed far beyond Minnesota. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, protesters gathered outside the courthouse in freezing temperatures, holding signs reading "Free Judge Dugan." Earlier this year, Judge Hannah Dugan was arrested inside her own courtroom for allegedly helping a man when ICE agents arrived. The image of a sitting judge being publicly arrested sent shockwaves through the legal community. The protest never stopped. This weekend marked the start of her trial, and once again, hundreds stood in the cold to defend not just her, but the principle at stake: judicial independence and limits on law enforcement power. Protest also spread in defense of Somali American communities, who have been repeatedly targeted by Trump's dehumanizing rhetoric. In Maine, Democratic candidates joined rallies in solidarity with Somali neighbors. In New York, protesters gathered outside police stations after reports of local cooperation with ICE. In Louisiana, protests erupted across multiple cities, as residents openly questioned why their state was assisting federal immigration operations. History looms over all of this. Fort Bliss in Texas, once used to detain Japanese Americans during World War II, is now the largest immigration detention facility in the country. Nearly 3,000 people are held there, with plans to expand to 5,000. Reports from watchdog groups describe disturbing conditions. Last week, a man died in custody.
Across the country, grief has settled in heavily over the murder of beloved actor and director Rob Reiner and his wife. For many, this loss feels personal, as if a piece of cultural memory itself has been torn away. But layered onto that grief is something colder and far more unsettling: outrage at President Trump's response. His words were not simply inappropriate or poorly timed. They were cruel, sneering, and shockingly devoid of empathy. To many, they felt almost celebratory. The reaction has been visceral, emotional, and widespread. People are not just mourning, they are recoiling. At the same time, another major development unfolded in Los Angeles. President Trump's decision to deploy National Guard troops to the city collapsed under legal scrutiny. A federal judge ruled the deployment illegal, ordering the federalized Guard units to withdraw. The troops are gone. The order stands. It was a rare and unmistakable moment of institutional resistance, a reminder that executive power is not limitless. But to truly understand the depth of what is happening in this country right now, we need to move away from courtrooms and press conferences and go somewhere much colder, somewhere raw, somewhere human. In Minnesota, just outside Minneapolis, an extraordinary and unplanned act of collective resistance unfolded over the weekend. In brutal sub-zero temperatures, ICE agents arrived in a quiet residential neighborhood in Chanhassen to detain 2 construction workers at a house under construction. Faced with detention, the workers climbed into the rafters of the unfinished home, hiding in the freezing air above. What happened next was not organized by any political party or institution. It spread organically. Neighbors learned what was happening and came outside. Then more neighbors arrived, then activists. message was simple and urgent. These men would not be taken quietly. As temperatures plunged dangerously low, people stood outside for hours. They shouted, they pleaded, they demanded that ICE leave. EMTs were called when one worker began suffering from exposure. Another remained trapped in the rafters for hours as people below passed up blankets, food, and hot drinks, doing everything they could to keep him alive. At one point, neighbors climbed into the rafters themselves so he would not be alone. Eventually, ICE agents withdrew. When they did, there was no sense of triumph, only relief. People embraced, they cried, they locked arms and shielded the worker as he came down and was escorted away safely. This was not about politics in the abstract. It was about human life. The message was unmistakable. Immigrants are not disposable, and this community will protect its own. That spirit did not fade with the cold. The very next day in Minneapolis, postal workers and community members gathered outside post offices after reports that ICE had been using postal parking lots to stage operations. Workers said they did not consent. They said they were not cooperating. One statement captured the moment perfectly. "We want a society free of secret police." That phrase has echoed across the country. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, hundreds gathered outside a courthouse in freezing weather, holding signs that read, "Free Judge Dugan." Earlier this year, Judge Hannah Dugan was arrested inside her own courtroom for allegedly attempting to help a man when ICE agents arrived to detain him. The image of a sitting judge being publicly arrested sent shockwaves through the legal community. It crossed a line many believe should never be crossed. Those protests never stopped. This weekend marked the beginning of Judge Dugan's trial, and once again, people showed up in force. Not just to defend her, but to defend the principle that courts should not become hunting grounds, that judicial independence matters, and that law enforcement power must have limits. Resistance spread outward. In Maine, candidates for governor and Senate joined rallies in solidarity with Somali American communities who have been repeatedly targeted by Trump's rhetoric. In New York, protesters gathered outside police stations after reports of local cooperation with federal immigration agents. In Louisiana, demonstrations erupted across multiple cities as residents openly questioned why their state government was assisting federal enforcement actions that their own communities rejected. History hangs heavily over all of this. Fort Bliss in Texas, once used to imprison Japanese Americans during World War II, is now the largest immigration detention facility in the country. Nearly 3,000 people are held there, with plans to expand to 5,000. Reports from civil rights organizations describe disturbing conditions. Last week, a man died in custody. This weekend, residents of El Paso protested outside the facility, warning that the country is repeating injustices it once apologized for. Corporations, too, have become battlegrounds. Home Depot stores across the country have been flooded with protesters after reports that ICE used their parking lots as staging areas. Apple stores have faced demonstrations after the company removed an app that alerted users to ICE sightings, reportedly under pressure from the administration. Protesters accuse corporate leaders of choosing compliance over conscience. Even President Trump himself has not been shielded. Protesters confronted him at the Army-Navy game. Near the White House, demonstrators unfurled a massive image linking Trump to Jeffrey Epstein, timed ahead of expected document releases. According to a new Reuters poll, fewer than 20% of Americans now believe Trump was unaware of Epstein's crimes. That shift reflects something deeper. Trust has eroded. While the streets are loud, the numbers tell an equally powerful story. Trump's approval ratings are collapsing, especially on the issues he claims defined his leadership. Polling shows him deeply underwater on the economy, on healthcare, and even on immigration. That last number is critical. Immigration has always been his political weapon. Now it is failing him. Tonight marks a quiet but devastating deadline. Millions of Americans are signing up for health insurance under the Affordable Care Act for the coming year. For roughly 22 million people, premiums are about to double. This is not inflation. It is not a market accident. It is the direct result of subsidies being eliminated earlier this year without replacement. Families are now facing impossible choices: coverage or rent, medication or groceries, care or debt. The administration has offered no meaningful fix, only dismissive messaging that minimizes the pain. Politicians are noticing. In Indiana, Republican lawmakers publicly refused Trump's demands to redraw congressional maps. In Maine, the governor announced an end to local cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. In California, state leaders are openly recruiting federal officials to leave Washington and come work for what they describe as functional government. This is how political eras end. Not in one dramatic collapse, but through accumulation. Through protests that don't stop, through court rulings that hold, through approval ratings that fall, through institutions that strain, through allies who quietly step back. The spectacle that once energized Trump's base is now exhausting the country. The cruelty is no longer abstract. The consequences are visible, measurable, and personal. What we are witnessing is not chaos for its own sake. It is a country pushing back, emotionally, politically, and structurally. Fear is weakening, resistance is organizing, power is shifting. History rarely announces itself, but sometimes you can feel the hinge turning. This feels like one of those moments.